The starship Righteous Indignation of the Holy Va'alan Empire drifted through the silent void at the edge of the Sol system. For 600 of their years they had traveled, their journey a sacred crusade. Aboard the ship, millions of Va'alan warriors lay in cryogenic slumber, dreaming of glory. Only the high priests and the admiralty remained awake, their minds focused on the sacred mission to cleanse the universe of the blight called humanity. High Priest Zor-El stood before the viewing port, his many-faceted eyes reflecting the faint, distant light of a yellow star. "So small," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "And from this unremarkable speck of light, they dared to pollute the cosmic order." Admiral Vox, a creature of chitin and sinew, shifted beside him. "The ancient texts are clear, Holy One. This Earth is the source. Their radio noise has been spreading for a century. It's a chaotic scream of dissonance that disrupts the great harmony. They must be silenced." Zor-El nodded, his mandibles clicking in satisfaction. The prophecy of the Unclean One spoke of this, a species that questions, that fights, that refuses to accept its place. They are a cancer, and we are the cure. Their mission was simple. The Va'alan were one of the oldest species in the known galaxy. They had achieved unity by subsuming all individuality into the great harmony, and a collective consciousness guided by the will of the prophets. All other spacefaring races they had encountered, once shown the error of their ways, had gladly joined the harmony. Those who resisted were reminded of the power of the Va'alan war fleets. There had been no true resistance for millennia. Humanity, a race that had barely learned to harness the atom, would be no different. Their primitive transmissions, full of conflict, emotion, and illogical art, were an affront. And the High Priest saw Earth as a festering wound on the face of the galaxy, and the righteous indignation was the divine scalpel. "Begin the standard first contact protocol," Admiral Vox commanded his communication officer. "Send the demand for unconditional surrender and assimilation. Give them a single cycle of their planet's rotation to comply." A powerful, focused transmission was sent hurtling towards the blue planet. It was not a message of peace, but a decree. It detailed the awesome power of the Va'alan fleet, the futility of resistance, and the mercy of being absorbed into the great harmony. The transmission ended with a single stark symbol, a geometric pattern representing total submission. On Earth, the message was received by a dozen different space agencies, military installations, and amateur radio enthusiasts. The initial reaction was disbelief, then fear, then a frantic global scramble. Now, the United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session that lasted only a few hours. There was no time for lengthy debates. The Va'alan had given them one day. The leaders of the world's major powers, usually at odds, were patched into a secure global network. The mood was grim. Images of the massive Va'alan ship, dwarfing anything humanity had ever built, were displayed on every screen. "Can we fight them?" asked the premier of the Eastern Coalition, his face pale. And the top military minds from every nation gave the same assessment. Their best sensors indicated the alien ship was powered by an energy source they couldn't even comprehend. Its hull was made of materials unknown to their science. Their most advanced nuclear missiles would probably not even scratch its paint. A desperate, unified defense was planned, but everyone knew it was a gesture of defiance, not a strategy for victory. And it was like watching a line of archers preparing to face a tank division. As the deadline approached, a single, unified response was crafted. It wasn't what the Va'alan expected. There was no plea for mercy, no trembling acceptance of their new overlords. It was a short, coded message, sent on the same frequency the Va'alan had used. It read simply, "We have received your terms. We understand your power. We have considered your offer." On board the Righteous Indignation. Now the communication officer translated the message. A ripple of satisfaction went through the command crew. "They are wise," Vox murmured. "They see reason." But the transmission wasn't finished. The last line came through, and the translation made the Va'alan officers freeze. It was a single short sentence that broke every rule of their harmonious culture. It was illogical, emotional, and utterly defiant. It said, "You have chosen your doom." A confused silence filled the bridge. "Yeah, what does this mean?" Zor-Al asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Doom. We are the ones who bring doom. Is this a mistranslation, a plea wrapped in bizarre pride?" Before anyone could offer a theory, the ship's tactical officer let out a screech of alarm. "Multiple energy signatures!" he cried. "They are emerging from behind the fourth planet. Not just one or two, hundreds, thousands." On the main viewer, the serene image of space erupted with light. Space itself seemed to tear open as thousands of human warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel. They weren't the primitive vessels the Va'alan had expected. These were ships of brutal, functional design, bristling with weaponry that glowed with barely contained power. They were scarred, patched, and painted with fierce emblems. They looked like they had been built for one purpose only: war. The Va'alan were stunned. Their long-range sensors focused on the primitive planet. I had completely missed the massive fleet hidden in the asteroid belt and on the far side of Mars. It was a feat of stealth that defied their understanding. "What is the meaning of this?" Zor-Al stammered. "Their technology is centuries behind our own. How can they have a fleet?" A new transmission was received. This time, it was visual. On every screen in the Va'alan ship, the face of a human appeared. It was Admiral Elias Vance of the Earth Defense Fleet. He was an older man, with a craggy face, a nose that had been broken more than once, and eyes that held the cold, hard light of a predator. He wasn't wearing a ceremonial uniform, but a simple, functional combat suit. "I'm Admiral Vance," he said, his voice calm and level. "You've made a very serious tactical error. You see, you looked at our radio and television broadcasts and you saw a fractured, chaotic species. You saw our arguments, our wars, our internal conflicts. You assumed this was a sign of weakness." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You were wrong. It's a sign of our strength. Conflict is the engine of our evolution. We fight, we fail, we learn, and we get back up stronger and meaner than before. For the last 100 years, while you were listening to our music and our arguments, we were listening too. We heard your harmony. We heard the silence of 1,000,000 species who had no voice of their own. And we decided we didn't want any part of it." He gestured slightly, and the view on the screen shifted to show the massive human fleet. "You call yourself the Righteous Indignation. That's cute. We call this the Soul Guardian Fleet. It's not our entire navy. It's just the local neighborhood watch. We've been expecting someone like you for a long time. We built this fleet in secret, in the outer system, on moons and asteroids where you couldn't see us. We didn't know it would be you. But we knew someone would eventually come to tell us how to live, and we prepared." He turned back to the screen, his eyes boring into the Va'alan command crew. "You gave us 1 day to submit. I'll give you 1 minute to turn your ship around and leave our space. If you do, you can go back to your empire and tell them that this system, this little blue planet, is not worth the trouble. Tell them that humanity is a species you don't want to meet in a dark forest. If you stay, well, you said it yourself. You have chosen your doom." On the Righteous Indignation, chaos erupted. Admiral Vox was screaming orders, trying to bring his ship's weapons online. High Priest Zor-Al was shaking, his entire worldview crumbling. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. The unclean ones were supposed to submit. The prophecy said so. "They are bluffing!" Zor-Al shrieked. "Their technology is primitive. Fire! Fire at will!" The Va'alan ship, a vessel of immense power, unleashed its primary weapon. A searing beam of focused energy lanced out, aimed at the heart of the human fleet. The beam struck one of the lead human cruisers. For a moment, the Va'alan cheered, but the cheer died in their throats. The human ship didn't explode. Its shields, a technology the Va'alan had never conceived of, absorbed the energy, flickered, and held. The ship rocked from the impact, but it remained, defiant and intact. Admiral Vance's voice came back over the comm, a hint of grim satisfaction in his tone. "Your turn is up." What happened next was not a battle, it was an execution. The human fleet didn't engage in a formal ship-to-ship duel. They swarmed. Squadrons of small, impossibly agile fighter craft darted from the larger vessels, moving with a speed and unpredictability that baffled the Va'alan targeting systems. They flew in patterns that made no sense, patterns born of 1,000 years of aerial combat on a hostile planet. And they flew like angry insects, not like a harmonious formation. The larger human ships fired weapons that weren't just beams of energy. They were kinetic projectiles, massive slugs of tungsten accelerated to a significant fraction of the speed of light. They didn't carry warheads. Their sheer speed and mass were the warhead. Each impact shook the righteous indignation to its core, tearing through its armored hull as if it were paper. The Va'alan ship, and designed for imposing its will on submissive species, was a single, massive, beautiful vessel. It was a cathedral of war. But the human fleet was a pack of wolves. They targeted its weapon emplacements, its engines, its communication arrays. They didn't try to destroy it in one glorious blow. They dismantled it, piece by piece. Inside the Va'alan ship, it was a nightmare. The great harmony was shattered by the screams of the dying and the panicked shouts of the crew. The cryo chambers, there where millions of warriors slept, were ruptured, venting their contents into the cold vacuum of space. High Priest Zoral huddled in a corner of the bridge, his faith gone, replaced by a primal terror he had never known. He had preached of the weakness of individuality. But in that moment, he was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Admiral Vox, his body torn by shrapnel, watched his ship die on the view screen. The human vessels, relentless and efficient, continued their attack. They showed no mercy, no desire to accept a surrender. They fought with a cold, focused fury that was more frightening than any berserker rage. He saw one human fighter, damaged and on fire, deliberately ram itself into the barrel of the Va'alan's main cannon, detonating its reactor and obliterating the weapon in a silent, brilliant flash. It was an act of illogical, suicidal bravery that the Va'alan mind simply could not process. The final blow came not from a massive cannon, but from a cleverly aimed torpedo. It slipped through the failing defenses and struck the ship's main reactor. For a split second, the righteous indignation became a small star. Then it was nothing but a cloud of expanding debris and silent, frozen bodies. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Vance watched the light fade. There were no cheers from his crew. They simply looked at the disappearing wreckage with hard, tired eyes. A young lieutenant turned to him. "Sir, what about the message they sent?" "The one to Earth. It said there were more of them, an entire empire." Vance nodded slowly. "I know, son. We picked up their navigation data before we fired. We have the coordinates of their homeworld, their colonies, their fleet positions." He looked out at the stars, now seeming a little darker, a little more hostile. "They came here to cleanse us. They saw a problem and thought they could solve it with a single overwhelming show of force. They were arrogant. They didn't bother to understand their enemy." He turned to his communications officer. "Send a priority message to Earth. Tell them the local threat is neutralized. And then prepare a long-range transmission. Broadcast it on all known Va'alan frequencies. I have a message for their High Council." The message was sent. It traveled across the vast distances of space, a faint whisper of humanity's response to the galaxy. It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't a plea for peace. It was simply the recording of Admiral Vance's final words to the Vialan ship, followed by the raw, unedited sensor data of the battle. It showed the entire engagement from the human perspective. It showed their tactics, their ferocity, their willingness to sacrifice. And it ended with a simple, typed line. "This was our neighborhood watch. We have noted the location of your home world, your primary shipyards, and your 20 largest colonies. We are currently calculating flight times. We suggest you do the same for us. Your crusade is over. Ours has just begun. Do not approach Sol again. The next transmission we send will not be a recording. It will be us." Back on Earth, millions of people watched the distant light show in the sky, unaware that it was the final moments of an alien armada. The governments of the world, for the first time in their history, were united not by a common enemy, but by a common, terrifying responsibility. They had shown their hand, and they had revealed their strength, and they had made a terrible, powerful enemy. In the Vialan home system, the message was received by a stunned and horrified council. The great harmony was broken by a wave of disbelief and fear. Their invincible ship, their divine mission, had been annihilated in minutes by a species they had considered vermin. And now, that vermin knew where they lived. The prophets had no answers. Their ancient texts were silent on this. For the first time in their history, the Vialan Empire knew what it was like to be the prey. They had come to Earth to deliver a message of doom, and in doing so, they had sealed their own. The universe they were just beginning to understand was not harmonious. It was a vast, dark forest, and humanity was not a deer. It was a wolf.